Hi guys, and welcome to my review of the ARTTI R2. This is the company's latest IEM, a single DD this time around. Just a quick mention is that the naming is a little bit, or can be a little bit misleading, since the R1, which came out earlier, is actually a 3 dynamic driver IEM, and nevertheless they called it R1, and this one is a single dynamic driver IEM. They called it the R2, so it can be a little bit confusing. Anyway, this is the R2, a single DD, as I mentioned. It's got a 10mm beryllium coated driver. In the back of the box he has some specs: 32 ohms impedance, 106 decibels of sensitivity. The whole box again is very much LITZ kind of vibe, so I'm assuming that once again maybe this is probably made by LITZ. The graph that is shown in the back of the box is basically what I got when I measured it, but I'll show it to you in a second. And that's it. I mean, the box is very simple, like I said, very classy, straight to the point, no frills. You open it up, and inside the IEMs came over there, and then straight away underneath there's a carrying case with some paperwork, and the whole carrying case actually, has then inside of it the rest of the stuff, the cable and the tips and so on. So let me just get this out of the way here. Okay, so I've actually got 2 units here, both colors. Okay. A green, aqua green kind of faceplate, and this one which has got like a orange gold kind of faceplate. This is the stock cable, as you can see. Okay, not a 4.4 termination, not a bad cable, actually not bad, considering this is roughly going for about $39, depending on where you get it. Here it is again, all wound up. But this one here, the second set, is actually using an upgraded A1 cable. Okay, so much nicer, which confers a whole. It's a nicer cable. It's just in terms of performance, questionable if there is going to be really any difference or any significant difference. I actually measured both of them. This one measures a little bit better than the stock one, but there isn't a whole lot of difference. And sound-wise, again, there isn't a big difference. I mean, or almost negligible. Let's put it that way. Anyway, stock cable. This is the stock cable. The case, simple. Inside, as I mentioned, it brings the cable. I brought the cable, and the tips, which are again are these LITZ kind of tips that you've seen, and then it brings these also black, more generic type ones, kind of a medium bore size. All right, I am using the LITZ, the white ones on this particular unit, and on that one I'm actually using the black ones on that one there. All right. Anyway, what can we say about the IEM? Let me just grab it properly. Very small shell, 10mm beryllium coated driver, as I mentioned. Very small shell, fits really nice inside of my ear. Very light. I mean, this is as light as can possibly be. I believe that this driver might have some relation with the driver used in the cadenza that I've also got here. Okay, and also in the T1S from HiFi. All right, all these 3 units actually use a beryllium coated driver. Also, there's the IVPIQ 100 also uses the same driver. So I believe that they probably are the same driver. Okay, I actually haven't gone to the trouble of opening it up, but just by the way that they graph and they sound, it seems like it's the same driver. Now, a small correction in terms of the sound is that although they are using this beryllium type of coated driver, in the R2, the typical beryllium timbre or tonality or has been stained slightly. Okay, so it's when you listen to it, you actually get more perception that maybe you're listening to an LCP driver, and once you have a lot of experience and you've listened to a lot of IEMs, it's not something which is fail proof. You can make mistakes. I've made mistakes, but usually you can kind of pick out what sort of driver perhaps or driver material is being used. DLC, LCP, CNT, whatever. Okay, anyway, like I was saying, fits nicely with the tips that I'm using, the medium size, beautiful, just sits beautifully in my ears, doesn't bug me. It really, it sits, it goes totally inside of my ear, in the whole conch, everything. It's just very nice, very nice. What have I got then here to compare the R2 with? I could have brought out a lot more IEMs, but I thought I would stick with these ones for the reasons that I will give. XSL X-ONE Mark III, the EPZ G10, cadenza, the QES cadenza, the PULA PA01, EPZ Q5, and the EW100. They are lined up well, this is how I perceive them, but they are lined up from the warmer sounding one to the brighter sounding one. Okay, that's how I've lined them up. Now, being warmer doesn't necessarily mean it's bad, being brighter doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. This is just how I perceive them. The EW100, the EW200 comes across to me as being the one that's got the most detail, but clean detail, because the EPZ has got about the same detail, just that it is a little bit less polished on occasions. Okay, and again, on the opposite end of the spectrum, the R2, for example, comes across as the one that's the warmest sounding one, but that doesn't mean that it necessarily has lost detail or it sounds wrong or anything of the sort. I used two songs especially to very much distinguish between them. I used Feel So Good from Diane Reeves, and I used It's On from George Duke. Feels so good, the way the song is, the cymbals, the whole song has got specific parts that enable you to distinguish very well in terms of the mids and upper mids, which of them is doing it with more energy or less energy. And it's On from George Duke, the drum, the bass line that's present enables you again to see which one has got the tightest bass, the marriage between that bass drum and the cymbals, how they are matched. So I thought those two songs, I listened to a lot more songs, but those two specifically were very easy for me to kind of position these IEMs. All right, okay. What is the sound here of the R2? The R2 has got, I could call it a very, I'm not going to call it a Harman 100%. I'm going to call it a relaxed Harman, okay, if you want to put it that way. The thing that jumps to you straight away when you listen to it is it's got a very easygoing tonality, a very easy to listen to timbre, and especially, for example, in Feel So Good, where you have this cymbal crash constantly happening. How can I explain this? You straight away see that it's very mellow in the way that it does it, as opposed to, for example, something like the EW200, which has got a little bit more intensity behind it, and that some might even think that it's too much. I personally don't feel that it's too much. I feel that it actually gives the song and the whole presentation of the IEM in the whole the necessary energy that it needs. Okay, but either one of them do it in a very agreeable manner. It's just then a question of what you prefer. You prefer a sound which is slightly more open in the mids, upper mids, and treble, or you prefer you're not a treble head, let's put it that way, and you prefer a warmer, more cozy type of sound. Then you will go for something more towards this end of the spectrum. Okay. That's the first thing that you notice. And the other thing that you notice very easily with these two songs, between all of these IEMs, is how these three, especially well, I would say the cadenza as well, but these three especially, the cadenza, the EPZ, and the Q5 and the EW200, have got a lot more twinklies and sparklies, a lot more detail up top. Okay, a lot more, just like I said, details and the twinklies and sparklies, as opposed to these ones, which also have a lot of detail. There's also a lot of ample twinklies and sparklies, just that they are more relaxed, more toned down, and ultimately less fatiguing, if you want to put it that way. Anyway, bass, it's clean. It's got a nice tonality, nice timbre, got a good texture. It is slightly slower than the bass on, for example, the XSL X-ONE, slightly slower than the bass on the EW200, and slightly slower than the bass on the PULA, the PA01. These three are probably the ones that have the most incisive, the cleanest bass, and I think that's down to the fact that they've probably got the best magnetic system in these three drivers. That's how I perceive it. I get the feeling that these three drivers magnetically have got the strongest magnet system, and it just tightens up the bass. You don't initially notice it too much on the X1, but you notice at the moment you push the volume a little bit more, you notice how it just tightens up you know, and it just slams really hard, like clean and hard. Again, this XSL X-ONE, it uses the same driver as the MIM Dark Magician, if you guys recall. And this Mark III version is definitely the best of the three versions that they've offered up to now. It's the one that's got the most balance in the tune between the bass and the mids and the treble. The highs, it's the one that's the R2 is the one that's the most relaxed, unquestionably. Actually, these two have got the most relaxed highs. Is there any lack of detail retrieval by that? I wouldn't really call lack of detail retrieval, but there are instances where you feel that you lose a little bit of that space that, for example, something like the EW200 will give you. Now, you could argue, oh, but the EW200 maybe is doing it in a way too pushed manner, so it comes across as maybe being false or colored. Okay, I can accept that argument. I don't personally agree with that. I think it's just the way it is. Anyway, an interesting fact, definitely with regards to the R2, is that although that it uses that beryllium coated driver, like I was mentioning, is you notice that it has a sound which is more like, for example, the sound that you find from usually LCP drivers, like the sound that you find from, for example, something like the G10, which uses an LCP driver. And it's actually quite interesting how the diaphragm material, yes, will to a certain extent dictate the type of sound, but it's also, you know, that's not the only case here where you have that disparity between what you probably would expect by the material used by the diaphragm and what then you actually hear. For example, the XSL X-ONE, it uses a DLC driver, usually known for having, you know, very good mid and up, you know, upper mid and treble presentation. And in this particular case, the way that it's been done and tuned, it sounds a little bit darker. Another one which also uses an LCP driver and it doesn't sound like the more usual LCP driver is, let's say, the PA01. Usually LCP drivers are, you know, better in the bass, in the low mids and so on, but they lose a little bit of cleanliness up top, and the PA01 doesn't do that. And I think it's down to the fact that it does have a very strong magnetic flux in its magnet system, 1.6 Teslas, if I'm not mistaken. So, you know, the diaphragm material, I believe, will definitely be an influence in what you can get in terms of final sound, but it's not only the diaphragm material, it's also the magnetic system, because you can have a very good you know, material being used, but if the magnet system isn't strong enough to then control and let the diaphragm move and stop as quick as it needs to be, or it needs to be done, then you lose it loses its significance, let's put it that way. That's why sometimes you hear some things like you hear some PET drivers, well, the majority of them are basically PET in the base, and then they are overlaid with that material, CNT, LCP, whatever. It's very seldom you find a pure LCP driver or pure beryllium drivers are very rare, or CNT. It's always got a PET base, but then they cover it with those materials to improve the tonality, the timbre, and so on. But you hear a more simple PET driver like the ones that KZ uses, but because they actually are using a good magnetic system, they sound pretty decent, those dynamic drivers. That's the reality. You know, let's be frank here. They might just be using a standard PET excuse me, diaphragm, but they've taken care of the magnetic system, made sure that it's ample and it's strong enough, and the driver sounds amazing. Anyway, that's a little bit of a side note there that I wanted to just give. One thing I didn't mention, and I'll just quickly mention now, is in terms of the price. The R2, you can pick it up for about $39, just over $39. The XLS, the X-ONE is about $49, so it's slightly more expensive. The G10 about $39, $40 as well. The cadenza about the same thing, $39. The PULA about $50, give or take. The Q5 about the same thing, $49, $50, and the EW200 about $39 to $45, depending on where you pick it up. So they all sit between the $39 and $50 price bracket, which is it's a competitive segment. Okay, I was going to compare well, the R2. I was going to kind of give you a comparison with lower priced ones and higher priced ones, but I thought no, I'm just going to compare it with the ones that are at its price range. And if you guys then do want me to make that comparison, I'll do it. I'll compare it with more expensive units and slightly cheaper units. So yeah, that's it. Overall, the sound of the R2, it's a relaxed sound. That's the main thing. It's got a very easy going, very easy to listen, smooth presentation. It's not it's not fatiguing. It's not going to offend anybody. Timbre and tonality, I think, are probably it's better. Technical capability, and then in terms of soundstage, imaging, detail retrieval, resolution, I would say they are good for the price. Soundstage a little bit on the smaller side, imaging pretty decent. It actually is able to distinguish between things quite nicely, and no real problems there. I would say probably the detail retrieval is the one that I would have liked a little bit more, much like in the case of the XSL X-ONE. A little bit more detail retrieval, a little bit more twinklies and sparklies, but I mean that's just me. Overall, it's a nice IEM, and the truth is I can't really fault it. I can't really say, oh no, it's not good enough. Now, which ones would I choose? If I have to be totally frank and totally honest, any one of these IEMs here is more than capable. More than capable. It's going to be down to what you prefer ultimately. Do you want a brighter, cleaner, more clinical presentation? Then perhaps go for something like the Q5 or the EW200. Did you want a warmer, more organic, more old school type of sound? Then perhaps go here for the R2 or the XSL X-ONE. Do you want something which is kind of the in-between? I would say then, okay, the G10, the cadenza, and the PULA are the in-betweens. But it's all very relative as well, because it depends on your ear anatomy, how it will fit you. You might take the EW200, for example, put it in your ears, and it comes across as a darker sounding IEM, and that's an extreme case, obviously. And the same thing can happen here with the R2, and you listen to it and it sounds bright or something. So it's always a very delicate issue for me to stand here and say, oh, this one is the one to go for. They are all good. End of story. These IEMs here are all good. So I think it's going to be down to things like overall build quality. If I take the R2 and I consider it's a plastic resin shell, and I take the EW200 and it's a metal shell, I mean this one in terms of build is much more solid, but basically they're the same price. This is the better IEM. This uses and has a very good driver inside. It's what they call an SCP driver. It's basically the mix between a DLC and an LCP type materials. So very good driver. Built quality is superior. It's a metal shell. It's going to be more sturdy. It's going to probably last longer than this plastic shell here on the R2. Accessories wise, very comparable. I mean, this has got a better stock cable, but in terms of tips, they're about the same thing. So it's these things that will ultimately be the determining factors between them. Okay. Because sound-wise, it's very easy. You want warmer, you want brighter. Period. It's as simple as that. Out of all of them, then, if I have to say which are the surprise IEMs, which are the IEMs that surprised me the most when I listened to them, well, the G10 definitely was one of those. I wasn't expecting the G10 to be as good as it is, and I also wasn't expecting the PA01 to be as good as it is. I have to admit that. The rest kind of, they kind of filled my expectations, let's put it that way. Even the R2, I kind of, when I listened to it, taking away just the fact that I thought it was going to be a little bit more brighter, it kind of was more or less the same thing. Just one last thing. For example, if you have a cadenza, do I think the R2 is a viable alternative, is a better IEM? Honestly, not really. They both use Beryllium drivers. They both use probably the same driver as I mentioned, but that's got a slightly more detailed up top presentation. This has got a slightly warmer presentation. So at most they are side grades. It's not one is better than the other. And I guess that's basically it. I mean, guys, there's really not much more than I can say. I'll show you now the graphs, and that's it, and we'll wrap it up. Hi guys, and welcome now to the graph section here for the ARTTI R2. This is the graph of the ARTTI R2 using these LITZ style tips. So sub-bass focus, it's almost flat by 200 Hz. 250 Hz is basically flat. Very slow progressive PENON gain, peaks at around 4 and then drops off. It's very smooth. Everything sits within a window of more or less 8 dBs give or take, so it's fine. The one that I'm showing you now is the R2 as well, but with a wideboard tip, and the wideboard tip does convey the IEM a little bit more sensation of space, of soundstage. Okay, but anyway, I'm going to compare it with the OG tip, which is this one here. First one I'm going to be comparing it with is the XSL X-ONE, the Mark III version. Bass is very much the same, but there's a little bit of a difference there in the sub bass, but honestly I didn't perceive it. And then what you do notice is that there is a slight more bit of energy in the upper mids on the XSL X-ONE, which is welcomed. But again, it's not as different as what you see. It's not the noticeable difference is not as significant as this. Why? Because then in this area here of 4 to 6, 7, the XSL X-ONE loses, so it loses energy in that section, while the ARTTI R2 has energy. So they kind of balance each other out, and that's why both of them sound very similar. The XSL X-ONE does come alive though, is when you give it some power. You give it some power and that thing comes alive big time. Next one is the next one I'm showing you is the EPZ, the G10. I mean, bass is basically the same, as you can see. However, when you listen to the G10 and you compare it with the R2, you definitely notice that the G10's got a little bit more detailed retrieval. There's a little bit more of twinklies and sparklies, and it's sufficiently noticeable. Okay, let's put it that way. It's not huge day and night, but it's noticeable enough for you to perhaps be more engaged by the G10. The next one, this one, but let me change here the color. Okay, this is the QE cadenza. Again, bass basically the same, a little bit more sensation of soundstage, yes, if I'm comparing it with the LED short tips. If I'm comparing it with the other version using the whiteboard tips, no, you don't get that feeling. What you do notice on the cadenza is that the cadenza, although graphically you wouldn't think so, but it sounds way more forward, way more way more detailed than the R2 does, and I think it's basically down to this difference that we find here in the upper mids. Okay, so that's that one out. Next one is next one is the PULA PA01. Again, the PULA is very similar across the whole frequency spectrum, but it sounds more energetic, more alive, more incisive, more detailed, more everything, and technically it's also superior, but hey, there you go. The next one is the EPZ, the Q5. Again, bass similar. It's the difference that we find here is that upper mids and treble is way more detailed on the EPZ. There's more twinklies and sparkles. There's more of everything. That just makes it well, I'm not going to say a better IEM, but it makes it a more lively IEM. Okay, and then finally, compared with this, we've got the EW200. Once more, we have a great degree of similarity in terms of the bass and as well the mids and the dips and everything. It's just that the EW200 sounds more detailed in that 2 to 4K area, and there's way more brilliance, there's way more detailed retrieval, more twinklies at the top end. But if you look carefully at the graph doesn't look that dissimilar. Alright, anyway guys, I hope I was able to shed some light here on the R2. Nice IEM. I mean, it's really a laid back IEM to listen to. Everything sits within a window of roughly 8-9 dBs. So there isn't, at least I don't consider there to be a whole lot of coloring or anything of the sort. No, if anything, it sounds darker than what it graphs. Let's put it that way. But it's a solid IEM. That's the truth. The R2 is a solid IEM. You just need to obviously now, if you can, listen to it and then make a more informed decision. And that's it. Okay, guys. Anyway, don't forget, like and subscribe. Any questions you might have, please feel free to ask me. Take care now. Bye bye.